Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our third webinar in this series. We have today with us the Disabilities Law Program of Community Legal Aid Society, CLASI, and this is the third in our Return to School Roadmap series of webinars. Today, we're going to focus on IDEA Part C, Child Find, Referral, Eligibility, and Provision of Services. Let me get my stuff going. So we are the Parent Information Center of Delaware. We have been here since 1984. We work in all 3 counties, and we help parents advocate for their children's educational needs from through Part C, through Part B, which we talked about previously, and also through transition. Today, we're going to talk about the Return to School Roadmap in particular, but please feel free if you have any questions about your child's education, about IEPs, 504s, eligibility assessments, IFSPs, which we talked about last time. Please feel free to go to our website at pickofdel.org or to contact CLASI. And we will definitely provide you with information, resources, referrals to make sure that you can advocate for your child and your family. Stephanie, you want to talk a little bit about the Disabilities Law Program?
Sure, if you go to the next.
Yep.
I'm Stephanie. I'm an attorney with the Disabilities Law Program. The Disabilities Law Program is part of Community Legal Aid Society, and we provide free civil legal services to vulnerable and underserved Delawareans. The Disabilities Law Program is the protection and advocacy system for the state of Delaware. We are designated by the governor to do this work, and it's we advocate on behalf of individuals with disabilities, including our little kiddos who are birth to age 3, since we're talking about Part C today. The work that we do kind of runs the gamut. We do individual advocacy, so individual cases on a case-by-case basis. We also engage in systemic advocacy when there's a significant concern or issue that's impacting several individuals. And then we also provide information, referrals, we do technical assistance. And then, like we're doing here, we collaborate with PIC on providing some presentations and resources.
And at the end of this presentation, we will put our information there again. So if you have any questions particular to this, or questions that have been brought to mind because of this presentation, please feel free to use that information. During the presentation, you can also use the chat feature or the question answer feature. And I've also put our email and phone number in the chat in case you have a question and would like to talk to somebody about that. So the Return to School Roadmap, here's the website that this information comes from. It is from the U.S. Department of Education, and it is intended for educators, school leaders, parents, families, and communities. So the goals, once again, are that the student has the support and opportunities they need to heal, learn, and grow in their classrooms and create environment where they belong and can thrive. Landmark 1 is to prioritize the health and safety of students, school personnel, and families. Landmark 2 is to build school communities and support students' social and emotional and mental health. And Landmark 3 is to accelerate academic achievement. And you can go to their website and read all of this information, but we're going to encapsulate some of it in this presentation. So previously we had 2 sessions, 2 webinars about Part B, in particular about child find under Part B, and then the development and implementation of IEPs. And you can find those webinars on our website, picofdel.org, under our video portal that's there. Today, we're going to talk about Part C in particular. And this guidance came from the Return to School Roadmap guidance that was posted on October 29th, 2021. Stephanie, you want to talk about Part C?
Yeah, so Part C of the IDEA, so the federal law that provides for special education, and in this case, early intervention services, is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. The law or the statute is found at 20 USC section 1431. And then the rules or the regulations, which are the procedures for that, begins at the Code of Federal Regulations is 34 CFR section 303. Delaware has an equivalent law, which is Infants and Toddlers Early Intervention Program. It is the law itself, the statute was recently moved from under the Department of Health to the Department of Education, and that's listed below as well. And then just a small note, the regulations for the Part C program or infants and toddlers, there's no regulations that's actually there. It's all in a manual, which is different from how Part B works. So Part C is specifically for children with disabilities from birth through age 2 in their family. So that goes up until their 3rd birthday. Once they hit that 3rd birthday, they are no longer eligible for Part C services, and they work on transitions. And the purpose of the Part C program is to enhance the development of infants and toddlers with disabilities, reduce the educational costs by minimizing the need for special education in the future. Right, so that the importance of that early intervention piece. If you give enough early intervention ahead of time, it can minimize what you need after. And then minimize the likelihood of institutionalization and maximize independent living, and then enhance the capacity of families to meet their child's needs. Part C, similar to Part B, is comprised of 8 subparts. Where we are mainly focused is going to be subpart D and E. And subpart D is all about child find, how the program identifies and finds, children with disabilities who would be eligible. And then the procedural safeguards, which is the child and family's rights under the Part C program. So really, really important in education everywhere, acronyms are everywhere. And so these are our acronyms that will be kind of used throughout the presentation. And I wanted to put them up front just so that we're all on the same page as we kind of move through this presentation. So early intervention services is going to be show up in the presentation as EIS, and those are all those services that the Part C program can offer to infants and toddlers and their families. The Individualized Family Service Plan is IFSP, and that's the actual plan that has all of that information about the needs of the child and their family and what's going to be provided. The local education agency, or LEA, is the school or school district. The state the state education agency is the SEA, and that's typically the Delaware Department of Education. And then the last one on there is the state lead agency. which is LA. And as of right now, that's the Delaware Department of Health and Social Services. There was a change in law that passed, which is moving the Part C program, the Birth to 3 program, to the Delaware Department of Education. And that will, the move is official July 1st, 2023. And one thing that has been included in all of the guidance from the US Department of Education around returning to school is that regardless of the COVID-19 pandemic or the mode of intervention or instruction, individuals with disabilities, infants, toddlers, students, and their families are entitled to appropriate services. Just because COVID-19 happened and the pandemic happened, law didn't change. Everybody retained their rights exactly as it was before.
And I just wanted to note that Pam Weir put the link for the legislation moving from Part C to DOE in the question and answer box. Thank you. Now we're going to talk about child find, referrals, and eligibility.
Yeah, so the guidance from the US Department of Education, the Return to School Roadmap guidance, I went ahead and put both of the links in the chat for everybody. It's broken up into 2 different different topics. So the first one is the child find, eligibility, referral, and then the second one is all about the IFSP, the Individualized Family Service Plan. So this first part that we're going to be talking about is about that initial eligibility stuff. So one bit of information that I wanted to go over before we go into the guidance. This is not in the guidance itself. This is in the law. So the post-referral timeline. So once the lead agency, in this case, the Birth to 3 program, once it receives a referral, so that's going to be a hospital, daycare, pediatrician, once they make a referral to the Birth to 3 program to say, hey, I think this infant or toddler may be eligible for services. The Birth to 3 program has 45 days to do all of these things. So they have to screen to determine the eligibility. And in some instances, there's a birth mandate, which has, there's a couple disabilities that are included under that if you have that, then all you just have medical documentation showing that you don't have to do the screening. And those are typically autism, deafness, blindness, deaf blindness, visual impairments. And then what happens after the screening is an evaluation is conducted. Even if the screening shows that the child may not be suspected of having a disability, if you as the parent requests an evaluation be done, then it has to be done, regardless of what that screening came out from. And then there has to be a multidisciplinary child and family assessment, if applicable, right? If we go through the screening and we're now eligible and we're going through all getting everything ready for the individualized family service plan. There's the family assessment. And then you have to hold the IFSP team meeting to actually develop and implement the IFSP. So all of these things have to happen within 45 days of the Birth to 3 program receiving that referral.
So Stephanie, I have a question. Can you please clarify that Birth to 3 program does not engage in post-referral screening? Information is collected to determine birth mandate. If no birth mandate is identified, then the infant and toddlers and their families move to the evaluation process. Thank you, Christina.
So what happens if there was a referral made, but parent or guardian wasn't contacted? So what the guidance says is that you've got to prioritize identifying the children and contacting their families. If the child is already over the age of 3 or 3, then they are no longer eligible for the Part C services. They would be possibly eligible for Part B. So then you would, the lead agency or early intervention service provider would need to provide information about Part B and the LEA, and that would be whatever the school district is that where the child lives. Review child find policies and procedures to ensure parents are referred, but not that parents of children referred but not contacted receive those appropriate informations, evaluation services. And then they're also required to report any non-compliance and make corrections if appropriate. And that's something that's required under their the state performance plan that is submitted to the federal government. And then if non-compliance is identified, it must be corrected unless the child is no longer under the jurisdiction of the program. And yes, thank you, Christina, for providing that clarification. So here's an example. These are all, we'll be providing examples throughout the presentation. These are all general. If there is, if something in here is like, oh, hey, I think that might have happened to me, I would recommend contacting either PIC or CLASI, just like it is in Part B with IEPs. It's all individualized, and so there might be some other factors at play. So Anna was referred by her pediatrician to the Birth to 3 program in June 2020 when she was 18 months old. Anna's father never received a follow-up. So the lead agency or early intervention service provider, and I believe that'd be Child Development Watch, should contact Anna to provide either information or evaluations and services, depending on how old she is now. And if Anna is already over the age of 3, she should have information, the family should have information given to them about the Part B program, and then report any non-compliance and make corrections if appropriate. And you're going to see that last little bit on almost all the examples, because that's one thing that the guidance is repeatedly set in there, is that if there is non-compliance, it must be reported and corrections made if appropriate. So what happens if the parent declined consent to an evaluation to determine eligibility, or if the child was determined eligible, but the parent said, I don't want services? Generally, there should be nothing should happen. If the parent declined services, that's kind of where it ends, other than the lead agency needing to keep clear and complete records. But the guidance says now they should maybe actually follow up with the parents, at least during this time, to see whether circumstances have changed. And you might have to, well, why, right? There may have been instances where the pandemic had actually impacted the family in such a way that kind of played into their decision to decline consent. And it's possible that those circumstances have changed and maybe the parents actually do want the services now and they just need to be contacted to, be able to share that. So here's 3 different short examples. So Parker's father declined the evaluation to determine his eligibility. So the lead agency or provider should reach out to Parker's family with information on child find, acknowledge the situations and priorities that may have shifted, and let them know that they're committed to supporting Parker and his family. Chloe was evaluated, determined eligible, but her mom declined services. Lead agency and provider should re-engage Chloe's mother to attempt to develop and or implement Chloe's IFSP. And then, what about if Parker or Chloe are already 3 and they no longer qualify because Part C is 0 through the age of 2? Then they should be provided with information on Part B and the LEA where they live. So what if the parent provided consent for an evaluation, but the evaluation hasn't been done yet? So remember the post-referral timeline, right? 45 days. They had 45 days to do this. And if it hasn't been done, there's some things that should be done. So the program should be prioritizing the longest pending requests. An evaluation should be conducted as soon as possible to determine eligibility, as long as, of course, the child is still under the age of 3. And if the child is 3 or older, they should be provided information on Part B and the LEA, and then report any noncompliance and make corrections if appropriate. So an example, Pauline was referred to the Birth to 3 program by her daycare in early October of 2020. Her mom gave consent for an evaluation in late October 2020, right? So almost right after she was contacted and right after the referral was made. So there was still that time, but the evaluation hasn't taken place yet, right? And we're in January of 2022. What can she do? So the program of providers should contact Pauline's mom and conduct an evaluation, unless Pauline is already 3. If Pauline is already 3, then they should be given information about Part B and the LEA. And then, of course, report the noncompliance and make corrections if appropriate. And they should also be reviewing their data to see whether there are any other families who are similarly situated, right? Other families who have consented to evaluations and evaluations aren't done yet. Can a virtual screening or evaluation take place? If Delaware's policies and procedures permit virtual screenings, then they can, and it's our belief that they are permitted in Delaware, so they can happen. And Christina Horton, if you have other information on that, please say something. But it's our understanding that they're permitted. But if they are being conducted virtually, the program should be asking, are the instruments going to yield valid results? Will you get results that are actually going to be useful and relevant? And if you use virtual screening or evaluations, they have to meet standards for technical adequacy and have to be non-discriminatory in implementation. So they can't discriminate based on language, race, and anything, any other sort of possible discrimination in testing and evaluations. So that was the first guidance document. The second guidance document is all about actually providing those early intervention services and some of the things that lead agencies, providers, and parents should be on the lookout for. So it's well known. I think that, you know, the pandemic has unfortunately impacted us really severely. And it's impacted, you know, not only our health, but our physical, social, of everything health. And it's led to joblessness, homelessness, food insecurity, health challenges, just to name a few. That, you know, a child's development and the family's ability and capacity to provide for their child has and can be adversely impacted by these types of stressors like joblessness and homelessness. So what are the lead agency and providers' responsibilities for ensuring that the IFSP teams actually address the ongoing impact of the pandemic in regards to the initial IFSP? So this is a child who's newly eligible, gone through the screening, gone through evaluation, and they're looking at developing that very first individualized family service plan. So what should the team be considering in terms of the COVID pandemic when developing the document? And they should be considering the full impacts of the pandemic, including you know, whether or not social, emotional, or behavioral supports should be included as needed services. And then all early intervention services must be culturally relevant, meaningful to the child and family, provided by qualified personnel based on peer-reviewed research, and necessary to meet the unique needs of the child and family. And what this really gets at is, you know, the core of IDEA is making sure that the individual needs of children are met. Everybody is different, right? No two people are the same, and everybody needs something different, even if it's a slight difference. And so making sure that all of the services that are being provided to infants and toddlers in the Part C program are all designed to meet their unique needs and their family's unique needs. An example, Soraya is a 2-year-old that developed severe anxiety during the pandemic and refuses to engage in conversation or play with anyone outside of her family. The IFSP team should identify the levels of functioning in all 5 developmental areas, which are physical, cognitive, communication, adaptive, and social or emotional. Assess Soraya's unique strengths and needs, and then conduct that family-directed assessment to identify the family's resources, priorities, and concerns, and the supports and services necessary to help Soraya's family meet her needs. And if we're looking at you know, a 2-year-old who's developing anxiety, right, then social and emotional services are probably going to be something that the IFSP team should be considering as necessary for her. So this is similar to the last question, but what if the initial IFSP has already been developed, right? What considerations should be taken into account in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic? So if warranted, they should conduct a periodic review prior to the 6-month annual review date. So generally every 6 months, there's the periodic review. In Part B, it's an annual review once a year. Here it's every 6 months, twice a year. And if there needs to be a periodic review conducted prior to that 6-month date, that should be considered. When conducting this review, and this should say semi-annual, I apologize for that. When conducting the review, consider the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the child's needs and the family's resources and capacities, and see whether any changes need to be made to the services being provided, including any changes to frequency, right? How often the services are being provided. If changes need to be made to the delivery of the services, to the method of the service or the setting, right? If you need to change, if it's being done in person, does it need to be changed to virtual? If it's being done in the home, does it need to be changed to maybe an outdoor setting? If it's being done indoors, maybe it needs to be changed to outdoors. So identify what changes might be needed to address the impacts of the COVID pandemic. And so here's an example. So the IFSP for 18-month-old Samuel has been in place for 4 months. So we're before that 6-month review date. Samuel's family recently lost their housing and moved in with extended family, and now they're having difficulty scheduling sessions with the providers. So what should the IFSP team do in this situation, right? Immediately schedule that periodic review. If they're having difficulty meeting their scheduled sessions, they need to identify what's going on and what are those barriers. Conduct a family directed assessment to identify any other resources, priorities, concerns, support services that are needed to help Samuel meet his needs. And then consider what changes might be made to those services. So does the frequency need to change? In this case, maybe the setting needs to change, right? If they're unable to make it to their provider for the early intervention services, maybe it's possible that the early intervention service provider could come to their home instead, and that might help them actually make it to their sessions, because sessions are coming to them, right? So what happens if the child and their family didn't receive some or all of their services that are required under their IFSP? Conduct a periodic review. What are the current needs? And are there any modifications that are necessary? And there might be a need for compensatory services. Those are what is provided to make up when they're not provided the services that are actually in their IFSP. And those determinations, like everything else under IDEA, should be individualized, right? It shouldn't be across the board compensatory education for everybody, or X criteria equals this. It should be an individualized determination. And then as is with all of these, report any non-compliance and make corrections if appropriate. So here's an example. Julian and his family have an IFSP, which includes nutrition services and occupational therapy. Due to the pandemic, they did not receive some or all of their services. So what should the IFSP team do? Conduct a periodic review, right? Let's figure out what Julian's current needs are, and whether there need to be any changes. Maybe he needs compensatory services to make up for the services he didn't receive. Maybe by not receiving those occupational therapy services, Julian actually regressed a little bit. And to make up that ground, he might need some additional services on top of what he's already getting. And then they should report any non-compliance and make corrections if appropriate. And here is a term to know that will be talked about in the next slide. So an interim IFSP provides a temporary early intervention service prior to completion of an evaluation and assessment. So child hasn't gone through the whole process yet where they've developed and implemented an IFSP. This is before evaluations have been done, before assessments have been done, and a qualified professional says this child needs this service immediately, and the parent consents. The child also then has to be determined eligible for early intervention services. Right, the parental consent was received, and then the evaluation and assessment must still be completed within that 45 days. So a referral is made, interim IFSP gets put in, still within that 45 days, an evaluation has to happen. IFSP team meeting has to happen where they develop and implement the actual IFSP. So what happens if the infant or toddler and their family received services under an interim IFSP during the pandemic? So they should be prioritized first, right? Because an interim IFSP is not an IFSP, right? It's supposed to be interim. If a full evaluation was not completed and the initial IFSP was not developed, then an evaluation should be completed. And the IFSP team should meet to review the results and revise the IFSP if necessary, and develop that IFSP, and then report any non-compliance and make corrections if appropriate. Example, during the pandemic, Kai was referred to the Birth to 3 program when he was 2 months old. He was not able to receive a full evaluation, but a qualified professional determined he needed immediate services, and his mother gave consent under an interim IFSP. And this IFSP has been in place for a year. No evaluation's been done, right? No team meeting has been done, nothing other than this IFSP. And he's still getting services, right, under this interim IFSP, but it's not that actual IFSP document. There's been no evaluation. So what should happen is Kai should have that evaluation, a full evaluation completed. The IFSP team should meet to review the results and revise, develop a full IFSP and revise the interim one if necessary, and then report any non-compliance and make any corrections if appropriate. So what if the parent says, hey, I don't feel comfortable my child getting services in person, can they be provided virtually? And the answer is possibly, maybe. If it's okay under Delaware's policies and procedures, which it is, if it's appropriate for the service identified. So for example, right, physical therapy, it's going to be really hard to do physical therapy virtually, right? So that might not be an appropriate method of providing physical therapy. And then if it's tailored to meet the unique needs of the child and family. So for an example, George, his IFSP includes speech and language services. Although providing early intervention services is okay virtually, right, under Delaware is okay. The IFSP team determines it is not tailored to meet his or her, his family's unique needs. So can't be provided, right, because it's not tailored to meet his unique needs. If it was, then it would be completely okay. But in this case, the IFSP team determined it wasn't. And so what happens if timely transition services were not received? And this could be transition either out of the Part C program and out of services in general, or it can be transitioned to Part B. So if contact was lost, the lead agency and provider should re-engage with the families. And if needed, conduct a periodic review of the IFSP to determine whether the transition services were not provided, and consider whether and to what extent compensatory services may be needed. And then take appropriate actions, even if the child is 3 or older. In a lot of the other questions that were presented earlier, right, it was take appropriate actions, but if the child is already 3 or older, refer to Part B and provide information, go for it. In this case, appropriate actions must be taken even if the child is already 3 years or older, and then report any non-compliance and make corrections if appropriate. So an example, 3-year-old Evie previously received early intervention services under an IFSP. As she was coming up on her 3rd birthday, her family received no contact to discuss transition services. So the lead agency and providers must take appropriate actions, even though Evie is already 3 years old. And that could be conduct a periodic review to determine whether they were provided for not only Evie, right, but for everybody. Hold the meeting to discuss the transition either out of Part C or into Part B, and then determine whether and to what extent compensatory services may be needed to correct this issue of Evie not being provided with the transition services. And then, as I just mentioned, right, review the data. Maybe there's other children who also did not receive those transition services that were needed. And then, as always, report the non-compliance and make any corrections if appropriate. So, what if you feel like your child's rights are violated? And the IDEA Part C provides for a couple of different avenues. I'm sure Pika would probably agree with this, that it's always best to try to resolve it with the provider or school district, right? Rather than get legal people involved or file complaints or something. But obviously, if things are so broken down, that's when you would really want to engage in those procedural safeguards. So listed here, so Spark mediation. I knew I was going to do this again.
Special education partnership for the
amicable resolution of conflict. Yeah, I should have had that pulled up. Yeah, so Spark is through the University of Delaware, and they provide mediation services. So if things if you disagree with a decision that was made by the IFSP team, you can say, hey, I'd like to do mediation to resolve this dispute, right? And Spark would be the one for that. Thank you, Tina. And so you also have the option of filing a state complaint, and those typically must be filed within 1 year from the disagreement. And then due process complaints typically must be filed within 2 years. And then the first bullet point I have up here is Spark facilitated IFSP meetings. At this point, Spark does not do facilitated IFSP meetings. They do them for IEP meetings. They don't yet do them for IFSP meetings, but it's just something to keep in the back of your mind. If it's something that they expand into in the future. And then as always, you can visit PIC or DLP websites for more information. You can contact us for individual questions. And then I also included on here the Cadre website. And they actually have their whole website is conflict resolution information, and they have a bunch of it's the Center for Appropriate Dispute Resolution and Special Education, and they have a bunch of resources and guidance on conflict resolution, right, under the IDEA and Part B and Part C programs, and really parent-friendly resources, webinars, and different things like that. So here is our information, and I just wanted to also caveat that this presentation is providing just general information, not intended for legal advice. I am an attorney, but I'm not giving legal advice. As I mentioned earlier, right, every person's situation is going to be different. And if you have specific questions about your child, please don't hesitate to contact either of our organizations. Just like PIC, CLASI is also in all 3 counties. And the numbers are listed for each of the 3 counties.
And Mary has put in the chat a survey. If you are participating in this call, we really appreciate you clicking on the link, filling out the survey. That lets us know what you thought of the presentation, what we can do to improve it or add things. Also, we will be having a series in February on discipline, special education, IDA, discipline, and restraint and seclusion. So those begin, I believe, on February 10th. Again, it's every Thursday at noon, just like these are. The intention is that you would be able to participate on your lunch break. They will also be in our video portal on our website if you are not able to attend but would like to, and you can get more information on that on our website, picofdel.org/events. And thank you so much for joining us today. Again, if you have any questions, if you know of any families that might benefit from this information, please give them our information or call us, and we will direct you to a service, a program, and an opportunity for you to learn more. And let me make sure. Thank you so much. Have a great Thursday.